On the carbon tax in particular, the Prime Minister has tried to bait me at times with certain ad hominems and name calling almost. But look, we have a very different opinion on the carbon tax. It's not right for the people of the province right now. I wish the Prime Minister would understand that. He's being very sclerotic in his approach on this ideologic marriage that he has to this principle. That's not to say that we don't believe in fighting climate change. We certainly do, but this policy is wrong.
Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal Premier Andrew Furey there speaking to local media following his party's loss in a by-election this week. Furey isn't mincing words, as you heard, conceding his federal cousins, and the price on carbon certainly didn't help his party's prospects. Is that a sign of things to come in Atlantic Canada and perhaps elsewhere? Let's bring back the front bench: David Hurley, Gary Marr, Brian Topp, and Marika Walsh. Marika, does it matter that the lone provincial Liberal Premier is speaking about the Prime Minister and his marquee climate policy this way?
I think it matters. I think it matters both because the Liberals want to finally get away from talking about the carbon tax, which they've been really struggling to get away from for the last few months. And I think it matters because it shows how isolated the Liberals are across the country right now. But Andrew Furey, he's sort of like he's not the canary in the coal mine. He's like the last canary. You know, on the East Coast, the Liberals have been wiped out provincially. In Nova Scotia, you saw the same lines that the carbon tax last summer was hurting them in provincial by-elections. But I'll also note that in Newfoundland, they've had a Liberal government for almost exactly the same time as we've had a Liberal government federally. So there's probably also just general election cycle voter fatigue also going on there.
How significant do you think Premier Furey's comments are, Brian?
Well, let me put it this way. I think they're hard to admire. If Premier Furey feels that the people of Newfoundland need immediate help from fuel price costs, then they should do what Wab Kinew did in Manitoba, and he should cut provincial taxes, which, unlike the carbon tax, are not rebated. And if he's taking a position in principle that he doesn't think carbon taxes are a good idea, then he's got some options. He can bring in a provincial cap and trade program, or he can join other provinces in a cap and trade program, or you can bring in equivalent regulations and do a deal with the federal government, cut an equivalency agreement, and get rid of carbon pricing in Newfoundland. What you can't do is just play straight politics and say carbon pricing is a bad thing, and simultaneously say that you take climate change seriously, because that doesn't add up. It doesn't add up to just play populist politics with carbon pricing, propose no alternative, and say you believe in acting on climate change, particularly when your province is a petroleum producer. So we can't have it both ways. And I think he was understandably upset at losing an incumbent seat. Premiers don't like that. We can understand his emotion, but tomorrow when he wakes up and has his cup of coffee, hopefully he'll talk about the issue more seriously.
My guess is the reason that he got sort of employed the vocabulary that he did and the way that he said it, Gary, is because he has been very specifically sort of criticized by the Prime Minister for his viewpoint, because the Prime Minister is naturally getting a lot of questions about how a Liberal colleague is espousing the views and is against that he's against the carbon tax. The Prime Minister, for example, has called him short-sighted, a short-term thinker. Basically, any politician against the carbon tax is a short-term thinker. He said that he was bowing to political pressure. This is kind of the first time that Premier Furey is fighting back. And to Brian's point, he may not have sort of the policy strength behind him, but he does have a lot of political ammunition. There are lots of premiers who feel like it's a winner right now to fight against the federal carbon tax.
You know, I looked up the amount of money that's collected by provinces and the federal government in carbon taxes in this country, and it depends on a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of nuance, but it's about $8 billion. The only country in the world that collects more than that is France, which is about 68 million people, and they collect about $9 billion. If you take Canada and France together, they make up about half of the carbon taxes that are collected among the top 15 countries in the world. And so I think that, you know, Mr. Furey, he is of the same view as Premier Moe is from Saskatchewan, Premier Smith from Alberta, Premier Ford from Ontario. I don't think that Premier Furey is wrong about the kind of impact that the carbon tax is having on ordinary Canadians, the ability to fill up the tank, to take your kids to school. There are many people who don't have the luxury of being able to buy an EV, don't have the ability to go out and have alternatives for using fuel. And I had predicted some months ago that when the carve out of the home heating fuel had been made, it was my prediction that that was going to be the end of the carbon tax, and it may yet turn out to be correct.
David, what are your thoughts on that? I think there is a valid debate over the merits of whether the pricing, I know that there's so much different back and forth about who is impacted by it. Is it affordable? Is it not? Is it raising the cost of living? But ultimately, the politics of it very much feels as though people have arrived at a consensus that it does impact their level of affordability, regardless of the debate about the merits of that point.
This is a tremendous victory on the part of Pierre Poilievre to have completely reframed this debate, to have put this issue in such prominence, and to have made it the standard bearer for unaffordability and for people's unhappiness about their standard of living. But that has happened. And there are no defenders left outside the government of this policy. And in fact, people in the environmental movement are cutting it loose in anticipation of a different government that they'll have to come to different arrangements with. Premier Furey is expressing frustration about what is inevitable in Canadian politics. It's an axiom that when you're in office federally for any length of time, your provincial parties suffer and suffer badly. So when Mr. Mulroney took over in 1984, there was not a single Liberal provincial government in Canada. And 6 months later, the 42-year-old Ontario PC dynasty was toppled by the Liberal Party because now Mr. Mulroney was in power. And so over the course of Mr. Trudeau's time here, we've seen all the provincial governments fall, all the Liberal provincial governments fall, BC, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. I mean, Furey is a very smart guy. He can see what's coming. And I know that he doesn't appreciate the way that the Prime Minister talked about him and talked about putting political motivations ahead of the interests of his own people. It's pretty sanctimonious. I mean, the consumer carbon tax is not the only way to go about this. So I think that Mr. Furey can tell that Mr. Trudeau is going to lose, and he doesn't want Mr. Trudeau to drag him down with him. He's trying to cut as much distance between them as he can, and I would be doing exactly the same thing.
All right. I have to leave it on that note. I'm out of time tonight. I appreciate all of you making the time for this great discussion. Thank you so much to our front bench this evening. David Hurley, Gary Marr, Brian Topp, and Marika Walsh.